Welcome to another episode of Digital Voices. My name is Bo Tiffany, talking about what's on our hearts and what's on our mind, trying to figure out what's on your heart and what's on your mind. Today, our special guest is Don McDougal. Don was a youth pastor for me at a church that I grew up in. He knew a lot of my foster brothers, has his own perspective, his own unique take on what our background was like. And I'm very happy to have him on our podcast today. And with that said, how you doing, Don?
Doing well. How are you, Bo?
I'm doing good, brother. Doing good. So how you been? It has been, well, let's see. I just turned 46. So it's been
a long time.
It's been almost 28 years, brother. Can you believe?
Yeah, we ran into each other. What was that? The Sun Prince? The Sun Porch Cafe over there on University Avenue.
Yeah.
At one time.
I love getting the chili from there.
What's that?
I said I love getting the chili from there. And when I saw you, you had told me that you had a heart attack, I think. I remember you had a glass of red wine. And
I actually have three. I didn't know about the first one.
Oh.
And apparently I walked through that. They discovered with the second one, which took, I went into cardiac arrest on that one. They discovered that my heart had grown its own bypass from the first one, so there was no indication. And then I had one a few years ago that was like really, really minor. In fact, first the lab work said I was okay, and then it just crossed the line, so very, very minor. But they sent me into Madison and have to do some testing and doing bypass surgery. So now the pipes are clear, or hopefully clear. That was, 4 years ago or something like that.
Okay. Wow. So you've had a struggle the last few years then, definitely, and actually going back. When did you first start having heart issues?
It didn't. It really wasn't much of a struggle. Obviously, life changed, but no, things have been good. Good,
man. Good. I see you playing. I went and did a little snooping on your Facebook just to see what you've been up to. Looks like 5 kids total.
I'm sorry, we were kind of breaking up there. What was that?
Oh, I said I did a little Facebook snooping. I said I think you're up to 5 kids total.
4.
4? Okay.
4 kids, and just had another grandbaby.
Ooh.
Born March 10th. So now we have 2 grandkids.
Well, that's amazing. Congratulations to you.
Thanks.
And
yeah,
Lisa.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you guys have been married how long now?
2000. So coming up on, it'll be 31 years in December.
Wow. You know what's amazing is I knew you before you were married. So that
I know.
That's testament how far we go back. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem that long ago.
That's the thing. And it seems to go a lot faster as we get older. It's an interesting take on life to see how everyone has come full circle. And how my perspective for me, when I knew you, I was one of the Cornelson boys. And I made friends with Greg Burnett and you and, there was quite a few other ones. Rick, all at the Lighthouse. And this is before you and Lisa hooked up and everyone was still young, myself included. I think when I met Greg, I was 12, maybe 11, something along those lines.
Really?
Yeah. And him and I
was wondering about that. When did you first, do you know the year when you first started going to the church?
So I went to Cornelson's when I was in 7th grade. So what age would that be? 87, 80.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because I started going there in
6.
My first time there was August of '87.
Okay.
So yeah, very.
And your family used to be, or well, was and is from Muscadet area, if I'm not mistaken. Some of my favorite memories with you are camping on your family's land. And
mine too. Those were great times.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I always really appreciated about you was your musical gifts. I remember, you know, especially like going back to the original singer for Shalom. Was it Jackie Polite? Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
And Greg Polite. Goodness, I'm glad I'm pulling this out. And I remember how gifted you were. At first, it seemed like you knew mostly chords, but then you just continued to progress because music is who you are. Because you started on a guitar, right?
Yeah. I started on guitar with the worship team, and then they caught me playing piano when in the sanctuary when nobody was around, and lured me into that.
Right on. Well, and it's fun because looking at your pictures, you do a lot of keyboard work these days. And I listened to some of the video, and by the way, the years of dedication have really enhanced your gift. So you sound beautiful, by the way. It sounds really great. Hey.
Thanks. I have a lot of fun with that. But, actually, I have to say keyboard, piano has become my main instrument, taken over from guitar. But when I first went to that church, I had never played North song in front of anybody before. So, the nerves were pretty high back in the early days.
Sure. Well, you know, the fun thing about Shalom is they had basically a full band. So we had a full drum. We had keyboardists. We had usually 4 backup singers or more. We had an electric guitarist and somebody for rhythm. And it was amazing because one of the things that I got involved with early on, if you remember, was mixing sound for Shalom. And so I was running the audio for Sundays and Wednesdays and, you know, even as a teenage level, and mixing all of those bands together along with some of the stuff that I came with, because I started out on oboe when I was in 4th grade, you know, and so I've always been musically inclined as well. I've actually played about 4 instruments, guitar since I was 25 now. So about 21 years, and love that. And vocally, once I get over my nerves, all that kind of got me into, doing the DJ, stuff. And so I've DJ'd and done the karaoke since like 2004 or something like that, off and on, either in Madison or surrounding areas. And then when I moved up to this area, that was another thing I got into, and it was easy because I would go out and sing karaoke, and next thing you know, I get to be friends with everybody, and the rest is history.
Well, yeah, my oldest son actually does that on the weekends as well. He's actually competition for me. The local band scene, it's so much cheaper to hire a DJ than it is a band. So we local musicians kind of grumble about such freaking DJs out there. No, he has fun with it. He does a good job. It's funny how life comes around. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Things you did and never realize that you'd be using in the future. And,
the tools that you pick up along the way, right?
Exactly.
That's one of the aspects of the podcast that I've done with my brothers that I thought was really interesting. Going into this, I knew that there was a lot of victims, for lack of better words, and that everybody had held on to a lot of stuff, and it had affected them as adults, myself included. And my intention wasn't to get into this to try to slam anybody. If anything, we as boys always felt that we were silent victims, and there was a two-facedness that we saw and experienced that was really difficult. And so as I've done the podcast, there's been this awareness of different facets of different experiences by the different boys and how that shaped them. Some of them, were really positive ways. For instance, I know my interview with Jason, he had talked about how there was certain skills carpentry wise and a work ethic that he was exposed to at Cornelson's that carried him through. And so despite the negativity that he experienced, he rather focused on that, which I thought was awesome because at the end of the day, that's what all of us are really trying to do is hold on to the best and try to leave the worst behind. This whole adventure to me has been eye-opening because the different experiences and the different ways that we dealt with things have shaped us. And I find the story of it more interesting than anything. So I kind of like to sit back and ask questions and kind of explore some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I guess my first question to you is, what do you remember of the Cornelson boys? Obviously you started Shalom back in 86. Did you meet us right away? What's your first memory?
I'm sorry, my first memory of
any,
Shalom?
Well, no, like the Cornelson boys, like, was that when you started?
You mean the foster boys or the sons or?
Okay. Sorry. One of the stereotypes that I've always grown up with have been called, as myself, when referred to back then, was the Cornelson boys, almost like a way of putting us into a group, if you will. And so that was all of the foster boys, not necessarily Clark's actual kids. Those were always separate. And I'm not sure if you listened to I know you said you listened to most of the podcasts with Cody. But there was a difference in how we were treated between being the foster boys versus being, biological per se.
I kind of grasped that from the one interview I listened to, and you can, clearly you can see that too.
Sure.
Some of the memories I have, but as from afar as it was, but so I wasn't privy to what was happening or what happened behind closed doors. But yeah, definitely. But yeah,
was there ever any talk or any speculation of things that might have thrown signs back then, amongst the people of Shalom that maybe things weren't what they were supposed to be or the way that they looked? Does that make sense?
Frankly, no. There's certainly not. Well, when I first got there, I kind of stood in awe of everybody.
Say again? Sorry.
I kind of stood in awe of everyone.
Okay. Why is that?
Just because the whole Christianity thing was so brand new to me.
Oh, sure.
I was learning and eating up.
Pat Whitell was
as I went along.
Was the pastor at that time, right?
Pat, yep. Pat Whitell.
Okay.
And so, I would just come in and I'd be kind of like in awe, thinking, and I came from kind of a rough background, not like you guys did. Mine was, I was a spoiled brat. It wasn't that I was needing or lacking anything, it's that I was wanting. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but I was wanting something different than what I was getting, and made a lot of bad decisions, and the typical drug and alcohol abuse thing just dragged me way, way down. So when I came into that experience,
how old were you at that point?
Pardon?
How old were you in 86?
87 is when I first got there, and I was 24.
Okay. So
yeah, so I was facing some mandatory jail time and a bunch of other things when I strolled into that place.
Can I dig a little deeper? And we can only go as far as you want.
Sure.
What'd you do? What happened? What's the setup for that?
I got drunk and stole a car.
Okay. Were you at least? So you were drunk?
I wasn't trying to steal it to
okay. Sure.
Sort of financial gain or anything like that.
Okay. Just being stupid.
I was just trying to get home. I was tired of walking. This is out here in the Muscat area. I was in the boonies. Actually, it was in Fenimore. I was just trying to get home, and became more deranged as I was walking through the hills at night by myself, running into barbed wire fences and all kinds of things. And I came across this car that just happened to have the keys in it, and this scary-looking haunted house-like thing. I just knew the people inside wanted to kill me, so I jumped in the car and I left. And eventually, the cops chased me down.
Now, your parents were farmers in the Muscat area.
No, they never were farmers.
Okay, but they owned a farm?
Yeah, it was my dad's private forester. We moved up from the Chicago area in '68. I was 5, and the original plan was to start a children's camp, particularly for kids in some of the rougher areas of the Chicagoland area.
Sure.
And bring them out to the country, and kind of like what we ended up doing in the youth group for 1 week in the year.
Right.
They wanted to do that full time during the summer, but that just never panned out. But yeah, they kept the land and eventually moved into town. But that place, the land out there became my sanctuary.
It's a beautiful area.
They were not farmers. My mom was a teacher, and my dad was actually he started his own business back in the early 70s.
Okay. What kind of business?
Fire extinguishers.
Okay.
Sales and service.
Nice. Okay. Now
he went from working at Time magazine in downtown Chicago to I don't know. I still to this day can't figure out how he ended up doing that, but he was successful. So hey, it was great.
Right. I can't remember if I met your family or not. I want to say I did, but I can't remember, to be honest. But one of the biggest memories that stick out of your family's land when we camped out there was the beauty of it. You had these really nice cliffs, these little bluff cliffs, and quite the view. And it was gorgeous. So I
have a hard time, that land has gone on to others now. My dad passed away years ago, and my mom sold it shortly thereafter. And I don't even go by it anymore. But yes, it was incredibly beautiful, and that point in particular, looking down the valley to the Wisconsin River, is just amazing.
Yeah, it sure was. It sure was. It's seasons of life, for lack of better description, but I think it's probably the best analogy that I've come across so far. Stages, seasons, whatever. It's one of the interesting things about being where I'm at now. I myself have tried repeatedly to be all I can be. I'm not sure if you saw me on the news or not, but that was a big thing back in 2014. Did you ever see that?
No.
I was on billboards on the news. The federal government has it's an agency of the federal government called the Criminal Information Bureau, and they went from paper to digital. And so they had to enter in by hand arrest records from, persons past. And they ended up transcribing a 1 gram or less THC pot violation in the 90s to an arrest for manufacturing and distribution of PCP and methamphetamine, which never happened. But that was on my record for about 10 years, and I struggled.
Oh, wow.
So I was on the news on a national talk show, and finally had that expunged. Previous to this, because that happened in 2005 while I was in college, which obviously when you're struggling to try to work or anything else, that became a detriment, which I ended up dropping out. Also affected the financial aid aspect of things, which I didn't know why, because there was no link. I didn't know of anything. All of a sudden my financial aid was gone. So it was a traumatic thing, because I was at UW Platteville at that point. So, but I, previous to all that, I, traveled, like 12 different countries and just all over, trying to figure out myself. I don't know if you knew, but from the time I was 3 until I was 17 and a half, I was a foster kid. So I wasn't in there because, I was making trouble. I was in there because my parents were messed up. Foster families in the system, while you would hope that they're healthy environments, many of them were not. And many of them don't specialize in holding kids from 3 until they're 18. They're foster parents for a few years, or they specialize in a particular age group. And once you become a teenager, it's almost impossible to find placement, because that's when they hit their puberty years, and they're a little crazier than when they're prepubescent. So, it was a experience for me. And then having the experiences that I did, I came out of it with almost like PTSD. Greg Burnett let me live with him for a while, and I remember it was about a year, and I'd never had a TV to watch. And after all the abuse that we went through, and I had been through, and not just at Cornelson's, but other places, I was almost just like a wounded soldier. I was just numb, and I needed to focus on healing. I was really fortunate, because when my foster care ended at Cornelson's, I ended up going to another group home, and ended up getting emancipated at 17 and a half. And I came back to Madison. I stayed in touch with most of the people that I had made friends with. Obviously the Cornelson boys, Shalom people like Greg Fleming and some of the other kids that we had in our youth group. And I still actually maintain some of those friendships to this day, which has been great. After all of the stuff with my background check was expunged, I had the opportunity to start a wreck diving charter on Lake Michigan. And so I bought myself a 32-foot yacht that slept 7 and had enough room for scuba divers and equipment and all that fun stuff. And went and got my scuba diver master diving certification in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and had a horrific accident after I completed my certification due to some faulty stairs. They didn't have grip and some other issues. But I ended up with spinal damage. I'm trying to really condense a long story. But had 2 hurricanes go through, had a personal injury case, wiped out the island. The attorney that I had representing me misrepresented me, stole the settlement, really settled the case for next to nothing, didn't alert the insurance company that I had a settlement for my personal injury, or that there was even a personal injury case. So this was finally all settled, or at least it's in the process of getting settled. But the grievance office found the attorney guilty on multiple counts of malpractice and misconduct. So hopefully, when it's all said and done, I'll end up with something rather than nothing. However, bleeding a turnip isn't the other coin phrase. So we'll see, and we'll just see what God has in store for me. But it's been a struggle, man, in maintaining.
Yeah, quite a road.
I think one of the things that I look back on is those tools that we're given as we grow through life. And had I not been equipped with some of the tools that I had going through the experiences that I had, I don't know as if I would have been able to come out on the side of the tunnel as pretty as I'm going to be. So, it's been interesting. And so I got a small piece of some settlement cash, and I decided to build a studio and actually start doing what I said I was always going to do, which is either write a book or make a movie or do a podcast.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
I've been working on one for about 10 years now. I'm still won't have it out.
But I feel like it's been interesting. So it's been a journey for me. So let's get back to some of you. That kind of catches you up a little bit for me. We can talk about more later, but I'm interested about the journey of faith. One of the things that I recognized with Shalom was the radicalness of it. Do you see that, or has that, or would you, what's your experience of Shalom and the Christianity that we experienced back then?
I kind of now, with the years that have gone by and the benefit of hindsight, Shalom was a weird mishmash it was like a melting pot of people from various things, and a lot of assumptions that took place. Just for instance, it was known as being a Pentecostal church, and in particular, they lined themselves up with Word of Faith people. And these are the ones that do the, currently the Joe Osteen. Is that his name?
I don't know.
Joe Osteen.
That is.
The televangelist.
Okay. And
praying for healing and standing on God's word and blah, blah, blah. That's what I saw as being the radical aspect.
Mm-hmm.
To a lot of the people that went there pursued.
I remember like Lucy Rael, who bled from the hands and wept holy anointed oil, and we would collect that from her and worship it. I'm
sorry, for some reason I can hardly hear you at the moment.
Oh, hold on. Is that better? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, much better.
Okay, so I was talking about Lucy Rael and how she would bleed from the hands and how she would weep, just secrete holy anointed oil, and we would collect that into jars, and we would almost worship it like it was Christ coming through her and his essence,
Yeah.
I remember she was ousted because she had a feather that she had on a taped evangelistic seminar where there was literally probably 50 to 100,000 people, it looked like. And
it was caught on tape.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw that too. Yeah. So
there was a lot. There was a lot of
like
that, though.
Yeah, that was pretty freaking radical.
Yeah. I remember that we had two different end of the world apocalyptics. We know the date that Jesus is coming back. The first one,
88 Reasons Why the Lord Will Return in 1988. And then when that was wrong, it was the 89 Reasons Why the Lord Will Return in 1989.
Right. People gave away their possessions. I remember in our church, it was radical. People literally gave away their money, their possessions on the first one. And some of them who were, in my opinion, were a little unstable, really went overboard and didn't prepare for if this doesn't happen, because it was faith-based. Right. And so just as a youngin' growing up watching that, that
had to be crazy.
Well, and we didn't know any better of what was what, but it was definitely crazy. And so it sounds like perhaps faith for you has changed a little bit.
No, well, see, that's just it. That's what I meant, kind of, I guess, by the melting pot. I didn't buy into that stuff. I kind of rolled my eyes. See, when I went in there, the thing that drew me was the music. And then
definitely unique in that aspect.
People there. I wasn't there because of their theology. And I know that there were others that were like that too. Certainly, we would get caught up in the moment at times, but there were some that, yes, they were absolutely gung-ho. The oil that's coming off of. Give me a tissue so I can collect
Tom Landman,
oil.
Good friend of mine back then. His mom, what's her name? Ethel.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember she would always run around the sanctuary, and we had a couple other ones that were. It was an environment where, like we would have healings, and then we would put their crutches or their walker or their whatever's on the wall as trophies. And then, especially with the laying of hands where like you would push them over and we would collapse, in some kind of, I felt like as a child, and again, we're only reflection. My last intent is to offend anyone that may listen to this or you. So it's strictly as a child watching this, it became something that wasn't necessarily healthy. Seeing the extent of overboardness that existed, where we had, Wednesday night was like youth group, and then we had our sermon, and then Friday was prayer vigil, and then Sunday was youth group along with the service, and then perhaps potluck or something. I understood all of the need for
the Sunday night service.
Right.
And then there were often, back in those early days, there were 2 to 3 seminars a month, and that would be Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, and possibly Wednesday, depending on the speaker. Otherwise, we do the regular Wednesday night service. Yeah, that was crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And thinking back now, thinking back that you boys were always there. Nancy were always there.
Yes, sir.
You were there more than I was. I was paid as the pianist for a while.
Yeah. It was overwhelming. During that time, I actually ran away from Clark's quite a bit. Spent the night in an abandoned truck in the middle of January, nearly froze to death, just trying to find help for the abuse. I'd went to the cops several times previous to that. That wasn't the only time I had to run away from Clark's. Now, he lived in Cambridge. So for 2 different occasions as a young teenager, I literally made a trek of over 30 miles to Madison by foot. And those combined experiences for me have shaped me in a way. It gave me a determinability of being able to do damn near anything. And it's been introspective. as I look back on this and how all of that's shaped all of us. Some of us, weren't able to stand up and deal with things like that. And so, we have some that haven't survived, they died already, some that have drug addictions, some that are homeless. But each one of them has an inability to carry a healthy relationship, a baggage that has loomed like a cloud over them their entire life. And I'm lucky that I was able to get out without having to finish my teen years like that. But at the same time, back then I tried to be a voice and I wasn't able to get anywhere because I was a little kid. And doing what I'm doing now, while at first might have been more self-centered in terms of healing or whatever, has become a story of how we've dealt with things, how each one of the boys has handled those experiences in different ways. And my hope is when it's all said and done, for anybody that might be interested in this, they'll find it interesting and introspective. Not necessarily, none of us as foster boys want us to have anyone feel bad for us. It's having someone feel bad for us is like, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, and I don't know if you can relate to that kind of thing.
Well, it's from my perspective, I've only heard a few things, and I think the majority of it came out of your interview with Cody.
Sure.
I had kind of heard of some things. I heard some accusations, but nothing substantial.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, when you hear this, and you were close enough to it as I was, and later on I became a parent, and you can't help but think about your own kids, and man, what if they had been in that situation? So I can't help but feel bad, if you know what I'm saying, for you guys and the things you went through. And some of the stuff that I heard from you guys, outside of Clark and Nancy, some of the other situations as well, I'm going, oh my gosh. Now, how would I have dealt with something like that if I had been in that situation?
The thing that was the icing on the cake is when we became adults out of the foster care system, each one of us was left homeless. So one of the biggest,
that's a crazy deal.
Yeah. Well, it's because they don't provide. So all of a sudden, you have these foster parents that are working for that check, right? In Cornelson's case, they were getting $10,000 roughly a month back then for us.
That's just insane to me.
Well,
I have no idea.
That explains how they were able to do a lot of what they did, right? It wasn't because they were.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So, it's. It has kind of lost my thought, but all of that brings an awareness to each one of us that went through this. And for as comfortable as it is, it's a story of a foster care system in the state of Wisconsin in Dane County, right? And it's not just one, it's multiples, right? Because us kids shared multiple homes amongst us, and each one were almost as bad. They might have been more, mental or just deranged, parents versus the physical aspects of the abuse. The big thing with Cornelson's was this idea of no pain, no gain, and hyperextending joints to cause pain but not leave injury. Does that make sense? So like using joints as a fulcrum, and in Cody's case, he had his arm or his knee or something dislocated. I think it was his arm, his shoulder.
Yeah, that is just scary stuff to hear.
Well, and so you would see in my experiences, you would see this. It reminded me of a Jekyll and Hyde. This
what it comes.
Right. And the idea of it is he would preach one thing and then become something completely different. And you take a look at his family, I think all of them dealt with it in their own ways. I think Michelle is interesting in her own right. I think we can find lots of good to say about her. But if you look a little bit underneath the skin, you'll see someone that was 17 dating a 34-year-old. You'll see another son of his who was married to someone much, much younger, Terry and Ang. Each one of those kids has an age difference, except for Dave. And Dave escaped, right? He went out to Colorado. And when he came back, he wasn't as close as the other boys, right?
Right.
Like Steve and Terry. He kind of stayed his distance and would occasionally come together and get together with the family, but it wasn't on the same level.
Right, definitely
right.
Not.
So I found it interesting, how all of that, because I would have thought as an adult, I always thought, well, what do the Cornelsons' actual kids think of what they experienced? How do they view what we went through? Do they justify it and make excuses? Or do they acknowledge that it was really messed up and that their dad was kind of a monster in a way? I don't know. I do know, though, that in the short amount of contact,
I don't know either, because I haven't been in contact with them.
It's one of those things where it's just a curiosity question, right?
From mine, not having obviously lived through what you guys went through and what you saw, because we didn't see things.
Right.
What I did see were some things that didn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Like what?
Frankly, it took time for it to build up for me to start going, wait a minute. But there were just things here and there. Nothing really concrete, at least not to begin with. But the Jekyll and Hyde thing, sorry, I'm stumbling here, but
it's okay.
It does remind me of. Did you ever see the movie Full Metal Jacket?
Yeah, I sure have.
Kubrick. So,
yep. Mm-hmm.
There's a line in there where the main character is confronted by the general, and he's asking what he has written on his helmet, and it says, let me think, it was a killer, is what he wrote on there, and then on the side of his helmet was something that said he had written "Make Love, Not War." So the general is nailing him on this. Why do you have both of those things in there, son? And he says something to the effect that he's, I think it was something about the duality of man. And I thought, it's kind of the Jekyll and Hyde thing in one sense.
No,
good. Yeah. And yet there's another side. I think people are just way more complex than we give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about my own life, and my wife Lisa and I had talked about this, that, Clark and Nancy, there were many wonderful things they did for us.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it wasn't pretty.
I got to dig. What do you mean? What happened?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure how much this, so when Clark became pastor, I was youth pastor. They brought me on as worship leader, and I kind of worked in this associate pastor role.
Mm-hmm.
Later, that wasn't working out, and then Clark stepped down, and then I was appointed interim pastor until they got a senior pastor. And after a couple of months of doing that, then they appointed me senior pastor. Well, I was trying to transition that church because I was never into the whole word of faith thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was into the worship stuff. I was into building community and those sort of things. And so the church was changing, and I was going where I thought God wanted us to go. Well, Clark wouldn't say boo about any of it. But then toward the end, I was taken in a direction that he didn't want to go in. And he started voicing a few things here and there, but then more than anything, he backed away from being involved. And eventually, at the very end, I was questioning, we're going to try to transition this thing, our faith, into something that is, I hate to say this, but the first time I went to Shalom, I thought it was sitting at the very first service. I thought it was some sort of game show.
Yeah.
You have the band's kicking in, you got the audience clapping and moving about, and there's excitement in the air. And then all of a sudden, these well-dressed people walk down the center aisle, and they jump up onto the stage, and they sit down, they stand in front of these chairs, and I'm sitting there going, "What the hell is this? This is crazy." So unfortunately, for a lot of people, when I became pastor, I took it as far away from that sort of scene as you could. In fact, I even got rid of the pulpit. I stood down at the floor level and would share from there, would teach from there. Can't call it preaching. I'm not a preacher, really. So the people that were really into the Pastor Pat type of style, I don't know if I can call it style, whatever it was, became more and more uncomfortable and began leaving. And at the very end, I was really debating, why in the heck do we have this ginormous building? I mean, we don't have a vision for doing the sort of things that it's built for. We don't have a vision for daycare. We don't have a vision for building a school. So why don't we give it away to somebody or sell it and give some money to other things that we believe in, yada, yada, yada. And in order to sell the building, I'm kind of giving, it's not even a Reader's Digest of what took place toward the end. There's so much stuff that happened in between, but in essence, it took a congregational vote to decide to sell the building. And we had that building or had that meeting, and the congregation, not unanimously, but voted that a majority voted that, yes, let's sell the property, sell the building. And we'll, do it out of a movie theater or a gymnasium or something like that. So,
well, and we originally went over to the community center outside of Fitchburg, over off of, was it Lacey Road?
For our cave pastor. Yeah, we did that when we walked out of the church, when Pat went over the deep end. So yeah, that was actually one of the possibilities, was going back and to the community center and something like that. But that night of the vote, I knew Clark wasn't happy about things, and he and Nancy quickly left the building. And so I tried to make my way back there because I wanted to talk to them and, extend the olive branch, as they say, because I knew they weren't happy about the direction I was taking things. And he got out the door before I could get to him. And apparently put Nancy in the van, and then he came back in. And I went outside to meet him, and his face, man, I had never seen Clark angry before. But at that moment, he just, he didn't yell, but you could tell he was holding on very, very tightly because he was wanting to explode. He was not happy about us building church stuff, lack of faith, and a lot of other things. I won't go into all the details, but I just walked away from that going, wow.
It sounds like you might have saw part of that other side.
That was the first and frankly only time
Yeah.
that I saw anything like that in Clark.
He was very much self-disciplined, right?
Yeah.
You take a look at the amount of things that he structured in our lives. He was very controlling of everyone. It was interesting because recently Nancy has a sister named Marion, and Marion is a lesbian that's been in a relationship with Mim for 40 years.
Weird. Lisa and I were just talking about her tonight. Oh my gosh.
And she actually wrote an article kind of about the dark side of Clark without really going there.
That's what she was telling me about.
Yep. And
how about the timing of that?
And so I reached out to her via email and we had a talk about it. I've sent her the podcast, but she doesn't want to look at that. You know, she wants to focus on positive and not tarnishing that maybe image that she had of Clark, which was already different than what most of, I think, yours were, because of how he responded to her and kind of put himself as a wedge between her and her sister. It went from a very tight-knit family of farm girls, and 2 girls and a brother living in a farm in Cambridge with Carl Korth, to meeting this evangelical Christian named Clark, and how that became what it was. Now, Clark used to show us slide pictures. I know that he did missionary work in Mexico. I know that they had some really good things that they've contributed to within their lives. Fortunately, human souls or human nature, especially one of the things that I've been studying and being a part of is kind of buying in a little bit more of the Eastern philosophy, like harmony, right? And balance and things like that. Yeah. And also, really knowing who you are, right? Oftentimes, we can fool even ourselves of who we really are and pretend to be somebody that we're not. And so part of walking the line of faith in Christ and growth is knowing truly who we are and then truly working on ourselves. Otherwise, we build up our lives in these images that don't really match the reality of it. And what's that?
Right.
Yeah. And yeah. I don't know. Did you ask why? I'm sorry, you kind of broke up there.
No. I said they are lies.
Right.
Yeah, they're not reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree with that. You know what? I'd already gone through the fire and brimstone in my previous life. So.
Right. Well, and ironically, at 24,
scare me.
Yeah, I mean, and take this as the great.
In my life, I discovered that God actually could still love me despite what I had done.
Right.
And it was so strong that when I got to Shalom, there was nobody that was going to be able to rip that out of me.
Mm-hmm.
So my perspective is probably going to be different than from other people, and especially, kids or young adults like you guys were. I could, I guess that's something I hadn't even considered. What did people go through who were in a different state? That to me is just horrible, because that's not what the message that changed my life wasn't anything like that.
So let me give you some more perspective. So I have barely made it back to church since I was in those days. But I have done a lot of soul searching and a lot of praying and searching for God. And one of the things that I think we all have our own truths, right? Whatever works for us upon the experiences that we went through become truth to us. For me, having traveled the world and gone to all these different countries and experiencing all these different cultures, one commonality was true amongst all of them. Actually, a few. So one is countries are the size of states here in the States, right? Or smaller. But that little region has their own language, culture, you know. You open that up into a larger region, and now you have your own religion, right? And so those pocket religions that were really regional, if you believe in, you know, obviously evolution is going back way back in the day. How do you get everybody to get along without killing each other, right? How do we live a lifestyle that's going to be as equal as possible without, you know, infringing upon my fellow neighbor? And so religion formed to be that tool, and, you know, explained the big answers of who are we, why are we here, who created us, what's our purpose, and what happens when we die. And each culture has its own way of explaining that, because those are important to people like you and I or anybody. And we want to know those things as we live our life to figure out what happens, right? And answer those big questions. To not have those as a universal big question amongst any cognate human living being. I don't think you could, you know, because we're all going to wonder, how the heck did we get here? And what happens when we die? You know, what's our purpose? You know, for some reason, there's a instinctual human trait of trying to figure out a purpose for our life. You know, we all want to fit into the cog somewhere. We all want to be productive. We all want to be counterparts of something greater than who we are. How do we do that? You know, and religion, I think, is a great tool, but for as great as it can be, I think what Shalom taught me was that once that tool, and I don't want to necessarily say outlives its purpose, but once that tool fundamentally in a paradigm way, the way you look at it, your thought process and how that incorporates things becomes twisted, you know, and it then becomes lost. And instead of realizing as we evolve that each one of us has our own origin story, each one of us has our own set of rules to live by so that we all get along with one another, and we stop getting as radical as we are, then we start getting, you know, forward movement as a people globally. One of the things that I've seen a lot of, I don't know if you've seen, but, you know, through Shalom and other places, was this idea of speeding up the second coming of Christ. You know, who cares about climate change? Who cares about this? Who cares about that? Because that just means that if, you know, before we get completely nuclear bombed each other, Christ is going to come back, because if he does it afterwards, it's too late, right? And instead of having common sense, faith becomes a tool to throw common sense out the door. And you can't have religion without faith, because it's faith-based. So then it becomes parallel or a paradoxical kind of scenario where you can't question the foundations, and you can't question even the ideas, because that would be, you know, sacrilege, and you would be, you know, speaking heresy, you know?
Oh, yeah. And there was a lot of that at Shalom.
For sure.
There was a lot of, that's absolutely cultish. And there were some real strong cultish tendencies in Shalom. I remember questioning Pastor Pat on a few things.
Like what?
And
we're having a great conversation. I'm just curious. It's probably my only opportunity to ask what happened. And this is so long ago, it doesn't even matter.
Good. For instance, at one point she was going to be making a major change in the worship. And there was this pastor and his wife from Jamaica that they were going to be bringing up.
Yeah, I remember that.
What's that?
I remember that.
Okay.
The Jamaican
taking
preacher.
over music ministry. Yeah. So basically, Jacob's Light was going to be out, and she would be reassigned in essence to something else. And I'm sitting in this. We were in a leadership meeting where, people who oversaw different areas of leadership or different areas of ministry would gather once a month to talk about where we're going. Pat, of course, was always there. So we're all sitting there and jaws dropping, whatever, and nobody's saying anything. And I'm sitting there going, what the hell? And finally, I just said, Pastor Pat, is this something that's already been decided and is definitely going to be happening, or is this something that we can be praying about? Because I don't feel right about this. And oh my God, this is a bad clash. There was anger on that one.
So, Shalom started out of a basement, right? It was Pat Whitell, Ed Whitell. Ed had made his money in realty and also as an accountant. They started out their Shalom in a basement that then grew, and Ed ended up purchasing the property. I think from what I heard, obviously with Steve, with the family, we were around them a lot. It was an investment, right? And for the church, but it was an investment, especially realty in Madison.
There were a couple of steps before that. I don't know about the basement thing, although I do have some sort of vague recollection of the basement days as being out there, but I don't know anything about that.
That was where Clark started. Go ahead.
Okay, and then Pat opened up a Christian bookstore on Monroe Street.
Yep.
And in there they had a room that they called the prayer room.
Mm-hmm.
And people would come, and some would come asking for healing prayers and what have you. And it became kind of popular, and so much so that people were saying, hey, we should be getting together. So they moved over 100 yards from there in the building that had been a Quaker church.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they always refer to as Little Shalom.
Right.
And so they apparently bought that property and started having services in there and began looking for a pastor. Long story short, Pat and Ed were told by some traveling minister that they should be pastors. And then Pat really took it on, and Ed was her associate. And yes,
mm-hmm.
Ed is an accountant and an investor, has been for years. Or
right.
Gosh, I don't even know if Ed's still around.
No, he's not.
And then eventually they outgrew that building, and that's when they bought the property on Fish Hatchery Road.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember stories from back then about people. There was, I guess, someone that came there that had their arm sewn to the side of their body, and they were prayed for, and the stitches moved up to their shoulder, and all of a sudden they were able to use their arm. Do you remember that?
I don't know that I ever heard that one. I don't think I would forget that one, but I don't think I heard that one.
Yeah, there was a lot of stories similar to that of miraculous healings kind of thing. And I was always curious.
Well, you mentioned earlier there was always an emphasis on healing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that was something I never really understood. Like I told you, I mean, that's not what drew me into the church.
No, and I especially understand that the band in itself was, I mean, the church dynamic, just because of the way that it was set up, especially with the band, was unlike anything else in Madison. Not that I have ever experienced anyways, or the surrounding communities. And it was during the 80s where big hair and that sound, right? Well, Christianity music at that time went from being a lot of the Hosanna, the very hymny, very, kind of thing, to dance, children, dance. We are this is the year of Jubilee, right? Like you remember playing them. I know. Like I remember, just it was completely different than any other service, and it provided an environment that, especially being in your young 20s and in that time, I can see the draw, right? I can see also the camaraderie. I can see the need that it was filling.
Young people there,
Yeah, for sure. But there was a lot of old people too. Don't get me wrong.
But I mean, there were a lot of people that were my age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of which, so do you remember like Rick Langer?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
then obviously, Greg, you and I are still friends. You still friends with Rick?
I haven't talked to Rick in ages.
He worked at Ward Brought Music.
Right.
And I ended up being the assistant director of music at Ward Brought Music in my late 20s, something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of a full circle for me, having my involvement with Ward Brought. It was an amazing place. Got to meet a lot of very talented musicians and just very interesting people as they would come through giving seminars or whatnot for various things. So that was a lot of fun.
I threw a lot of cash into that place over the years.
Yeah, me too.
Various instruments.
So,
but Rick, actually, he came back because he was a missionary in Mexico.
Oh, is that what he ended up doing? Nice.
Yeah, and then he came back, and we had him when I was pastoring. He and his wife ended up starting a Spanish-speaking church in, they ended up meeting in the assembly room in the school wing.
Okay.
We just kind of turned that over to him.
Nice.
Yeah, At one time, I had 4 churches meeting in the same building. It was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Definitely interesting.
Yeah.
How has
the original vision.
Are you still operating a church or some, anything like that?
I have not been in a regular church service for probably 13 years.
Okay. So what's your journey of faith? Obviously that brought you in. Really like the music. We're going through some stuff in your own background. Found something that filled your heart with what you needed and pursued that. We talked about, how it was at first. We talked about Shalom dissolving. What happened with your faith after that? Are you still solid in your faith? Are your views the same? What are your thoughts and opinions now that you're in your, I don't want to say your later seasons of life, but now that you've
had 3 heart attacks, so maybe the accurate thing to say.
So how do you view it? Where's life brought you?
Oh gosh. The battery on my phone is going to run out before I can go through all that.
I better plug it in.
Reader's Digest. See, when I became senior pastor, it was a journey. It was a transition from what was, tragic, I thought, what happened at Shalom.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things. And wanting to change the church. And one of the very core things was to change it from what you would think of as an institutional church,
mm-hmm.
where it's all about the gatherings. It's all about offerings. It's all about hanging crutches on the wall, which just makes me sick.
Trophies.
Trophies is exactly right. I don't know. Somebody just never saw Jesus doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I don't think the apostles carried around like all of the stuff that he'd accumulated
from behind showing all the, come see this. No. So we were trying to transition and dumb enough to think you could actually do that. But it was a journey, right? learning as you go, seeking God, trying to do what you think He's saying to do. And the one thing I realized is that, our place was, we had all kinds of different things going on. All kinds of ministries. We had 6 worship bands at that point, and we had so many musicians. I felt bad for other churches. They had trouble just getting one group together. And we had 6. We even had a youth band, and then we had a children's worship team. And we had all this stuff. And a couple things happened. But the short of it is, I began to realize that, we had all this stuff going on, but we were only referred to it as a pizza church. We're a mile wide, but only a quarter inch deep. And I said, man, we got to change. If you blew your tire out in the middle of the night and you didn't have a spare, is there anybody that you would be comfortable calling in this church to come and get you and get you some help? And I realized I didn't have one. I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been people coming that I could call. I'm saying I wasn't comfortable making that call.
Right.
Because I know there would be all kinds of people that would have given a hand.
Right.
But the lack of comfort in that they know me well enough that I'm not going to make this call if I absolutely need help.
Well, and I relate to that because back in the day with Shalom, we actually had sexual predators that were part of our congregation. Clark actually sent one of the boys, or was going to. Jason has a story about that on his podcast.
I know of that one.
Yeah.
That's
scary.
Unbelievable.
The police or the detectives came to Jason and said if it wasn't for him, all this stuff would have happened and blah, blah, blah. And then he ended up doing some good and coming forward. He tells that story. I don't want to ruin it. It's on the podcast, but yeah. It's...
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
You never know what you get in the church.
We had another one when we had the daycare going that we have to find out. We didn't have an incident, thank God. But anyway, so so basically we were transitioning.
Right.
There were people that didn't want to go. One of the things that I felt very, very strongly about from day one, actually, was. But when you get into ministry, I don't want there to be a middleman between person and God. In fact, I think it's the job of the ministry to remove the middleman.
Right.
So that it becomes a very personal thing. They know how to talk to God. They know how to have a conversation, instead of having to go to a service to get it. So that's the kind of stuff we were stressing. And lo and behold, we discovered there are a lot of people that like to keep the middleman in place. And we were just kind of blindsided by that. Short of it, we got pushed out of the church. I could see that if I were to stay on as pastor, the church was going to split for a second time, actually. And I still would have stuck with it, except, I had been praying for years, God, you still want me to be pastor of this place. And, so this is going on just shy of 10 years that I was a senior pastor there. And I'm praying going on into church one day, you still want me to pass this place. Or no, my prayer that time was, Lord, can I step down now? And in my mind's eye, I saw a green light, literally, a green light. I'm going, I was shocked. Because all these years of praying that prayer, I'd never got a green light before. Anyway, I went in a very, very different direction than what the original pastor and Clark as pastor wanted to take it. And some of those people followed and some didn't. We bought a little farm just before all this happened, which, I see God's hand in because this place became my sanctuary.
Talk about the one in Mount Horeb?
No, we're out past a little past Spring Green.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, it's, we end up, the amount of betrayal that happened was unbelievable. And even, bad enough that people who I thought were friends betrayed me.
Mm-hmm.
But my own family did. At that point, my mom and my sister had moved down to Madison, and she met my future brother-in-law there. I even did their marriage, and he became board of director, and he was part of the whole process.
Sure.
Of giving me the boot. So
that's difficult.
I guess my faith, even what's really ironic, is I still think the same way I did when I first became a Christian. About God and all that. That stuff hasn't changed.
Right.
It's the other stuff, the doctrine, the wrong theologies, the show that I was never really into, but now I'm even more against. Church services in general, I just don't have a place for them. I want it to be, I believe it to be something that's very, very personal. And from that, where everybody's coming from that place, then maybe you have something to build on. And so it's much more organic, much more grassroots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, and it does. The search for God is individual. I think that's another universal truth amongst any religion. And God forbid, my ways of viewing this are way off. And I die tomorrow and I see God and he said, look, Mormons was actually the true religion and everybody else has to go to hell. I think that's a joke that I heard once upon a time. And it goes to show that when we do die, I think the Egyptians said it best, that they had a feather that would be put on a scale and weighed against your heart, right? And if your heart was heavier than the feather, then you were not going to make it into the heaven of the Egyptians, right? And I think Christianity is the same way, or any religion is the same way. If you operate in a place of earnest and you are trying to seek him or her or it, it comes from the heart and in a place that even if we have it wrong, I would like to think that God is loving and God is caring and God wouldn't judge us for having it wrong as much as how do we treat one another, right? What do we do for our neighbor? Did you give more than you took out of life? Those types of questions. And the answer is not verbal, it's how we live. The proof's in the pudding. So.
Yep, that's exactly. Yeah. We started doing things like we had twice a year, a single parent oil change.
Okay.
Where
I like that, by the way. That's catchy.
Yeah. Marketing. We would have single parents. At first it was single moms, and then somebody called and said, hey, what about a single dad? Well, yeah, duh. And so we would have, out in our parking lot about 6, 7 sets of folks with jacks or what have you, and we had worked it out with Napa right around the corner to be able to get the oil filters that we needed. And we would this is going way too long, but we would do the oil changes. We had things going on for the kids. It was all totally free of charge. We would pay for the filters, the oil, and what have you. And Napa gave us a break, which was nice. But that was the kind of stuff that motivated me, got me going.
Yeah.
But that still is an event. What about my neighbor who's ill, right next door?
Mm-hmm.
And we kept pushing the button that, man, this is stuff that we need to be really looking at. We opened up the doors for the ministry to the poor that took place, and they would have meals once a week, and they had a food pantry, and not only a food pantry, but they to take their truck to different locations on the south side of Madison.
Mm-hmm.
It was fantastic. I mean, absolutely, it was the real stuff. And that stuff I get excited about. Well, I started hearing from people more and more about some of these people that are coming to our services, or unruly, things are getting out of hand, and it's because people are getting pushed out of their comfort zone. You know, it's like we had to come face to face with that. What am I going to do about this? What about the needs that are around me? And to me, this is why I'm so anti-organized religion. Is once you get organized, you lose the basics. And the basics is love. Do you love people?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going to be measured by. How big is your heart?
Right.
You know. And if you see a need, are you doing what you can to meet the need? And I just felt like what we were doing was just playing church.
Right. Yeah. There's a co-symbiotic relationship that develops that people in church, at least in Shalom days, and I'm sure a lot of other places, but I digress. There's the people that need help, right? You've fallen on your face. Life has been really hard. You need a friend. And you have some people in church that really feel good about themselves for helping others, right? And it becomes,
to help others.
Yeah. And so something that can be really healthy and good can also easily become not so healthy and not so good.
Yep. Exactly.
You know, and so the trick too, as we are in church or we, you know, are having these organizations that we're a part of, is making sure we keep it real and making sure that we don't fall off skew. And it's really hard to see when you're in it, right? It's like swimming in the ABC soup, but you're holding on to the letters. Really hard to see what it is that it spells out unless you're looking from a distance and it says, oh, help yourself, you know? And you know what I mean? So, yeah. Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's been an eye-opening.
Back to your question. Back to your question. You know, strangely, over all these years, I still think about God much the same way I did once I took that plunge. I think about his church very, very differently.
Right.
But when it comes down to the basic stuff, which is really all that matters, I'm
keep
kind of
it simple, stupid.
Surprises me that it hasn't really changed.
I can't wait to see what's after. And if we're in front of God and he's like, you know, I kept trying to tell everybody, just keep it simple, stupid. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I love that expression. Yeah, exactly.
You know, this has been a journey. I think I mentioned that in the beginning. The story is one that I stepped into and just wanted to be open to the experience and see where it left me. And this conversation that I've shared with you today has been wonderful in its own right. And
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it is nice to obviously reflect and look at some of the things. It's also nice to talk to someone as important as you were to all of us that were in your youth group. You know, you spent a lot of time with all of us, myself. I'm very grateful for the time and effort that you put in. I'm very grateful that you allowed me to be a part of the Lighthouse. I'm very grateful that I didn't necessarily feel like a foster kid around you as much as part of the guys being out at the Lighthouse. And those experiences, those experiences out there, I cherish. And so I thank you for allowing me to be a part of that.
No, thanks needed. That's awesome to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. More so, I'm super glad that you and I were able to reconnect. I hope that, you know, it's not uncomfortable for you looking at the stuff. I think didn't pick that up off of you. So I hope it wasn't an uncomfortable experience. I think it's
no, not at all. I don't like putting things under the rug anyway. So
yeah,
I think looking back at stuff is not only good, but it's important.
It's as we go through life, confront your fears, right? Confront
yep.
The things that are holding you back. For me, there's a lot that I carry in some way that I definitely feel I'm able to shed because of what I'm doing right now and what I've learned as I've done this about myself as well as others. And so I hope that the podcast in general allows people to connect with that and in a way that is good. And if not, at least for all of us boys, I think that being able to connect with one another, share our stories amongst, one another, and, realize that life isn't done and we're all in this together. And if we can make lemonade out of lemons, well, let me add the sugar, baby.
Well, obviously, it's obvious that you guys had to do that, which is, I am so, I haven't, Jason and I are friends on Facebook, but we haven't really connected. Cody and I have to some degree over the years,
Mm-hmm.
Which has been really neat. And I love watching, actually, obviously the death of his wife was a horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to see him with his boy, and even just his philosophies of life that come out,
Mm-hmm.
this is so wonderful. So here being able to connect with you again is just fantastic. I enjoyed all that time with the boys, whether they were Nelson boys or foster boys, whatever tag people gave you. And you were just boys. And the fact that you were going through, had come to do some pretty hard backgrounds, just made my heart go out to you guys all the more.
Well, hopefully we weren't too difficult on you back in the day.
Well, I was learning too.
One of my favorite memories.
Overall, no. Everybody had their moments, but we also had great times. But that's what like we were talking about earlier, I prefer to think about that stuff.
Yeah.
Don't want to ignore the past, but I don't want to dwell on.
Right. Right.
There were wonderful things.
Yes, absolutely. You got to take the good with the bad, but if you ignore all of it, then you don't learn, and right. So I think that's the truth of it. It is a pleasure. It has been a pleasure to know you in my life and to have you be a teacher in my youth, and also to see where you're at today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope that we're not strangers from here on out, and please give your wife a hug and a kiss for me. But it has been a pleasure, and I wish you the greatest of nights, and we'll talk again, brother.
That sounds good. I look forward to it, Bo.
All right. Thank you for being a part of my podcast.